A colleague said to me the other day, "What's your next video about, Charlie?" And I replied, "It's about the mistakes I've made when building Chadwick." And he replied, "That's going to be a long video." Hi, welcome back to Chadwick Model Railway. I'm Charlie. So, Chadwick mistakes. There's been dozens, absolutely dozens, but that's not an issue, is it? It's the evolution of a model railway. But there are two sort of major drawbacks with making mistakes, and that's what it costs you. It costs you time and it costs you money. The money might not be so important, but it's the time, to build a baseboard and then end up in a wood burner, that sort of thing. That's what the fundamentals. If you want to, you waste sort of 50 quid building baseboards and then realise that you're not a carpenter and that's a mistake, then it's kind of so be it. But it was the 4 days it took you to produce those baseboards in the first place. I'll just wait for this helicopter to fly by. That was the sound of freedom. Right, so videos. Now, during this video, there will be several links here to previous videos and their number, and hopefully I'll remember to give you the number in case you're watching on a TV and you don't see these little links that come up. But if you go on a computer and you go to the Show More tab, right at the bottom, there's a downloadable spreadsheet provided by a very generous guy known as Ron Ventura. And the permissions are set that if you click on the spreadsheet, you should be able to download it straight away. And within there are a list of all my videos and also listed by playlists. So whichever video I'm referring to, you can go and watch the whole thing should you have nothing better to do with your time. Whoops, there we go. Right, where did it all start? Where did it all go wrong? Now, I think it's fair to say that most of our first layouts are mistakes, but they're not really mistakes. They're a process that we go through to improve our modelling skills and to get a better grasp of the hobby as a whole. And this here is the original Chadwick TMD. And here should be a link, and it's video number 1. Now here's a view of the track plan in Train Controller, and I did use on this layout first radius curves. It's built in 2 separate boards, and both boards are 6 foot by 3 foot, and they're constructed to those sizes because that way one of those boards would go into the back of my trusted old and mighty Vauxhall Vectra. So if I was going to go to a model railway show, I would have to do it ridiculously 1 board at a time, and then also bring all the stock as well. But if you're running sort of 10 miles away, then it's a couple of ferry trips there, and after the show you a couple of ferry trips back, so it wasn't the end of the world. But here is the original Chadwick layout. Now I must confess it didn't take me long to tire of this layout, because I then realised that I wasn't necessarily a model railway show kind of guy, though that has changed in recent sort of years. But at that time I didn't really want to go to a model railway show and stand behind it all day. I wanted to go to the show and look at other stuff and learn and become inspired by better modelers, let's say. So where was the future with this layout? Well, it didn't take long for me to realise it was the end of its life, to be perfectly honest, and that I would have to modify it. And having the space available, it's obviously a great asset that I could turn it into a much bigger tail chaser with an island in the middle where I could stand and watch trains go around all day. Now, before we leave the original Chadwick TMD, I just thought I'd touch on sometimes the fact that we buy stock that we don't really need. Now, this is an extract from video number 3, link here, and it shows the APTE. Now, we all buy stuff that we regret, whether it be poorly manufactured or it doesn't really fit in. But this was one of these things that once I bought it, it struck me as a one-trick pony, because it really didn't fit in with Chadwick TMD. As you can see, it negotiates the curves somewhat precariously. Having said that, it wasn't built for first radius curves. The documentation said minimum of second radius curves. But you can see that it doesn't do well around Chadwick. And within a matter of weeks, I had sold this train on to a friend of mine from our model railway club for the same money that I paid for it, to be perfectly honest. It was one of those things that didn't really sit, and perhaps there's a lesson there that sometimes we buy something because we're not necessarily inspired to do, but we lust after it. And it's a case of throwing your money down really without thinking of, what it's going to do. How often is this thing going to be seen? And the APT is a fine example of something that was around in just a fraction of time, around the sort of mid-70s, and then just disappeared. And if you were to buy one and run it on your layout and you like it, then fair play. But on my layouts, it was because it was though they're in such a narrow space of time and as a prototype, then it really didn't belong, so I sold it on. And I'm sure that's the case for many people, the fact that we buy these locomotives and don't really need we don't need any of them, do we? That they don't really fit in. Now, I'm not trying to lecture you, but my layout, it comes from kind of 1968 to 1974, with the odd exception, i.e. the HST unit. I wanted one of those on my layout, and I've got one, and I don't care whatever. But mine is a pre-tops layout, 68 to kind of 74, with a little bit of slack. And to that end, I don't go and buy Class 56s, or I don't go and buy Manners from the great GWR days. I don't. I've got one main steam engine, and that is King George V, which is the first one to return to mainline running. I think it was in 1971, and that sort of fits in with my scheme. But my point I'm trying to make is, don't willy-nilly go and buy stuff as I've done in the past and make these mistakes. So that more or less saw the end of the original Chadwick, and as you've seen, there are items still dotted around that came from the original Chadwick. I mean, nothing has really gone to waste. All the buildings up on these shelves are from that kind of era, and invariably we don't throw things away, we collect them. So the next development for Chadwick was really this area here, but as a large tail chaser, and hopefully you can see with the development of how the original Chadwick integrates, and also as I went through the rigmarole of trying to design a Fiddle Yard that would work. And whilst I made good progress into that area, eventually I was struck down by a medical issue, and that was my knees. Because at the end of the day, every time I came from one end of the room into the centre of the layout, I had to scurry underneath, as people call it, a duck under. My right knee was getting pretty shot, and I was forever trekking from inside the layout to the outside, because every time I wanted a tool, I would have to go underneath the board, underneath, over to the other side, get the tool, come back, go underneath, and carry out the task I wanted to do. But then the front end of the board, it was not really becoming a fiddle yard, it was more of a tool storage area, because I was stacking everything up on that board to carry on with the progress of the layout. But fundamentally, it was my knees that gave in. And people say, oh, that's easy, Charlie, why don't you just have a flap? Well, to be perfectly honest, there are so many people that I know and I've seen on YouTube who have a flap area, with a couple of lines, and they still get problems. Well, my flap area was going to have something like 6 or 8 lines around a fiddle yard, and that was clearly going to be out of the question. So then it was a case of going back and thinking, what other options did I have? And then, of course, I came across the magic word, Helix. And now, having these two Helix, it's absolutely wonderful because I can walk freely in and out of here. But not only that, I've now split the layout up so we can have multi-person operations, as it were. So we can have one chap here working in the branch line station. You could have a guy here working within the TMD, and also when I make it, there's the Freightliner depot that's going to go over the top of here. So we've kind of expanded the layout to bring in friends that can join me in operational running days. I suppose one other point worth talking about really is the size of the layout you build, and could you make a mistake there? Quite easily, really. A friend of mine who sadly died did say to me, be careful what you build, Charlie, you might not be here to see it through, which is a fair point, because this thing here, I'm not going to finish all the track laying probably until September, by the time the track is all down and thoroughly tested. I've only got 3 more bits to do, a little bit of tweaking in the TMD, branch line station then to build, and the freight depot, which is the other side of the TMD. And whilst they might seem small aspects really, but then again there's almost no scenery done, so, and that's a huge undertaking as it is. Anyway, be careful what you wish for. A good point. So now let's move on to some of the more simpler mistakes, let's say, away from layout design. So now let's turn our focus to track. Now, almost without exception, right throughout Chadwick, I have used Pico Code 100 standard wooden sleeper track. I have a reasonable amount now of DCC Concepts Code 100 sleeper track, because I wanted to do a comparison to see if their higher nickel content would need more or less cleaning. So in this area here, in the TMD and the reverse loop area, there's a lot of DCC Concepts tracks, so I can do a comparison. But I digress. This layout, as I've said, is based 1968, 1974, and these are the main lines from Chadwick to London, wherever that might be. Well, in those years, these lines would have been replaced with flat bottom concrete sleeper track, i.e. this sort of stuff, again from Pico Code 100. But I've made the foolish mistake of not using it. I've used the wooden sleeper stuff, and I think the words we're looking for is a buffoon, really, because do I really want to dig this track up and replace it? Well, no, I don't, because this is in and ballasted, whereas over here on the main lines running through the centre of Chadwick, I could easily replace these lines with concrete sleeper track going up for the points over there and to the points at the far end here. But would it look any better, or would it look odd because this has concrete welded track, whereas in the other key areas it hasn't? Well, to be honest, it's not going to take a great deal of time. It's probably what, an afternoon's work really, or well, half day's work in it, to rip out these two lines, solder the cables onto the new ones, run those cables. No, we'll make that a day's work, shall we? That's not going to get done in an afternoon, is it? By the time I get underneath there and snap out all those dropper cables and put the new ones back into the BDLs for the block detection. No, that's a good day's work. But would the layout look so much better for it? Well, there's a question that I can only answer in the fullness of time once the fundamentals are done over here in those other key areas. But here's the mistake I've made. I should have thought about it and used concrete track earlier on. And I think the reason I didn't use it, because I didn't have the skills then to blend the concrete track into the wooden sleepered points. And here you should find a link to video number 153 in which I explained how to weather concrete sleepered track to match in with wooden sleepered points. So now we move down into the Fiddle Yard area. My initial track plan for the Fiddle Yard was appalling. It really was quite basic. It was, you know, it was really sort of chimp material. Honestly, you could have got a, you know, anyway. I got involved with a gentleman by the name of Lee Stoddart, and he sent me an email saying, Charlie, you don't want to do it like that, you want to do it like this. And guess what? I was absolutely blown away. It was 3 times the price, because there's points everywhere. And as an aside, I haven't made the mistake which I did on the very initial Chadwick of having short radius points. Almost every point on the layout except for the TMD are long points. The TMD is made up mainly of mediums. So I had this. Any mistakes I've made here? Well, of course there are. One of the mistakes I've made is because I'm into block detection, all that rubbish, I haven't segregated these into separate blocks. So these are one blocks and they're far too long. So I need to get underneath there, cut a couple of tracks, well, cut every track, and run another cable to some bit of hardware, and it will work far better. But there we go. Right. As a consequence of having a lower deck Fiddle Yard, of course, the upper deck is free from trains. Now, I don't know if you follow Lakeside with J.M. Folston, but he's come across similar issues, that he has too many trains to keep on his upper level, and he's also going down the same avenue of Helix building. Now, my Helix are 5.5 turns long, and that gives me the right angle of as it were, getting up the hill, because if it's too steep, locos can't manage it. It was 4.5 turns and it was too steep, so I turned it all down, made it 5.5 turns, and it works fine. You might say, why don't you make it 6.5 turns, because it'll be even more gentle? Well, no, because at 6.5 turns, the decks are closer together and the locos then can't get through. They're striking the parts of the level above. So 5.5 turns worked out just fine. So we come down to the Helix and everything seems fine. Not a chance. What a complete nugget that I didn't build the Fiddle Yard before the upper decks of the level, because it was more of an evolution, me finding that I needed the Fiddle Yard after I'd built the upper level. Then I had to construct the Fiddle Yard after, and trying to fit all this in was trying, let's say, but I've got there in the end. But if you're going to build a 2-deck model railway, then clearly you're going to build the bottom level first. And when I mentioned the 5.5 turns on the Helix takes me down to this height, there was a little bit of planning, particularly on this board here. On this board, underneath the viaduct, there are no points whatsoever. So there's nothing to go wrong under here. No point motors, nothing at all, bar keeping it clean. And the heights here were quite crucial, because the height of one of these really right boxes, I think they're called, is 31 inches or, no, 31 centimetres or 12.25 inches in old money. So they fit underneath, because the height here is 13.75 inches or 35 centimetres from there, because these boxes are brilliant. I like them and I want them to be able to slide underneath to give me decent secure storage underneath the layout without sort of dust and everything else getting in there. So that's why I came up with this height. I can actually get underneath the main boards onto the above the Fiddle Yards, and I've done that in the past, where I've had to lay on the Fiddle Yard, obviously not on this section here, lay on the Fiddle Yard with blankets and boards and do some maintenance underneath the boards. I've had to do that a couple of times. It's like upside down limbo dancing. It's an absolute nightmare, and you kind of get travel sick as well, because you lose all your sort of horizons. But that's where I've been with that. A couple of big mistakes there were, especially not building it first. But hey, we learn by them, or hopefully you learn by my mistakes and not your own. Of course, power systems are definitely worth a mention, and I bought into the Dynamis system, the original one that first came out with the Pro Box, as did our Model Railway Club. And to be perfectly honest, just feeling the temperature of the water with DCC, we really didn't know what we were talking about. This did us proud. From then, when I moved on from there, I invested in the Digitrax DCS 100. It's okay, I bought it second-hand on eBay. It wasn't a major investment. And from then I went to my current system, which is a DCS 240. I'm not recommending any of these because my knowledge of DC systems, it just isn't wide enough. I don't really know much about power cab and lens and ESU and all the rest of them. If you want real advice, you go to someone like James of DCC Train Automation. You say, James, this is what I intend to run. I want to run X amount of sound locos and this, that and the other, on a layout that's so big. What do you suggest? And it's only by asking people who have an in-depth knowledge that you'll get a more professional answer. Don't go on YouTube and because one bloke's done a review of something, he says it's brilliant and there's an affiliate link down below and whoopee, because he hasn't really reviewed everything. You have to go to someone who's an expert on the plethora of systems right across the full available range. Right, God, get that out of your system, Charlie. But have I made a mistake? Well, it's hard to say really, but I keep these now as bench spares is what I use. The big mistake I did make is, where do you put these things on your layout? Because surprise, surprise, I put them underneath this baseboard on the wall. And of course, the Fiddle Yard came around there, so it had to go. So underneath the baseboard I went, took it all down and found somewhere else for it to go. And then I built this drawer. And it works quite adequately. I was thinking, whether the cable's long enough at the back when I pull it out, but at the end of the day, it's very rarely I go to this drawer because, I turn the power systems on with one of these little remote B&Q cheapy triggers. so I don't need to go into the drawer unless I'm doing any sort of serious wiring. I don't go in there for fault finding because I'm blessed with the fact that I don't make that many faults, and when I do find a wiring problem, everything's labelled, so it doesn't take me long to chase it back. What usually happens is I find a problem and it's because of something I did yesterday, and then you can sort of go in there and sort things out. So always do one thing at a time before you move on to the next thing. Right, how about DCC train automation? Where do you put your screen? Now, running a railway with some form of automation, you clearly need a computer, and this is an old gas-powered Dell. It doesn't even have screen recording on it, which I use for train controller. You don't need a powerful computer or anything, but it's just as usual because of an evening I can take it in the house and faff around rather than stay out here. Anyway. But the screen is no good because at the end of the day, when you want to put a monitor up so that your other friends can come around and play trains and see what's actually happening, you don't need to be squinting into a laptop and trying to change the screens over. So I need to put up a TV type monitor somewhere, and I hadn't really thought about it. And I think this area here, because it's sort of central, is the only place it can go. And as I recall, the DCC guy, Larry Pucknett, he brought a video out on how to fit a drawer that you buy on Amazon underneath your bench, so I can put a laptop top, well, a keyboard and a mouse on a pull-out drawer here, bung a computer PC thing underneath somewhere, and then wire it all up so both myself and a couple of mates can use it and sort of set the scenic trains off whilst we do our other shunting and fiddling. Anyway. Another thing that I failed to plan. What a surprise. So to fit the screen, clearly I'll have to take down this big shelf above this area of the layout. And my good friend Richard asked me if I'd like a hand next week. And I've almost bit his hand off actually. So Richard, you now know what we're up to on Monday. We'll be taking down all these buildings, taking down the shelves, sawing them up to size, hopefully fitting some kind of computer monitor screen thing and setting it to work. Now I have of course made dozens of other mistakes in the building of Chadwick, too numerous to mention, but it's things like track work, wiring, couplings on locomotives, fitting decoders, all these sort of things. Anything that's prone to a mistake or a lapse of memory, and of course it's straight out the window. And then we get to this board here, which is worth a mention because this is the second major board of the TMD, as it were, and as you can see it's all coming together, and I planned it through, made a couple of changes which you'll see in a future video. But over there you can see there's a surface mounted point motor, because I know that to put a tortoise underneath it will interfere with the running of the Helix. So I'd taken this off, fitted the point motors underneath, put it all the wiring and all that sort of stuff, put it back together, and lo and behold, this point here landed plumb squarely on top of the Helix, and I need to use another surface mounted point motor here. And as you can see, I completely missed the fact that this point motor would land plumb square on the outer track of the Helix. What a complete fool. But we make these mistakes. This is the sort of thing that railway modelers do. Well, the sort of thing that I do anyway. But it's the fact that we come clean about it so we all learn from each other's mistakes. Now last week we saw the first video of my Swift series, and that's a series of videos that are 10 or 15 minutes long, nothing sort of too lengthy, that dive deeply into a certain subject that doesn't necessarily appeal to all modelers out there. So it's a specific look, and these videos will come out say once a month or once every 2 months, but they will not interfere with the sort of my 2-week cycle of main videos such as this one. And if you can think of a sort of a quick and dirty video subject, then please leave it in the comment section below, along of course with a thumbs up. That takes me on now to the spring period, and I've got some videos lined up that I know I want to shoot based here around Chadwick, which are a little bit different and hopefully should bring a little more interest. Well, that just about wraps this one up, and I'd like to thank, as usual, the patrons and the people who donate to the channel. Without your help, I wouldn't be able to do it, and if you'd like to become a patron, then there's the button there, and you get these videos a day earlier than everyone else without an advert. There's the button for the subscribers, and a video here and here to keep you going. I'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.